Assalamu alaikum, inshallah you're well guys. So we're going to go back to the interview series and we're going to talk about the interview question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years time? Or what are your long-term career plans? And this is a common question at the early career stage. It hasn't come up much for me since I became qualified and I've interviewed elsewhere, but it is popular at the early career stage because it's a good way of differentiating between candidates who really know their career path, they've done their research, and those who have just applied for the sake of it. As you know, when you're a graduate or when you're a school leaver, you sort of follow a scattergun approach and apply anywhere and everywhere, and employers are aware of that, so they ask this question to see who really knows about the career path that they've chosen to apply to. Now, this is one of the few questions where I'd advise you not to be too detailed in your answer. If you provide a lot of detail and you're really specific, you may end up describing a career path which doesn't exist at your employers, or a career path which is simply unrealistic. I remember when I started my career, I wanted to be the youngest ever CFO of a FTSE 100 company. Alhamdulillah, that response never came up in the interviews I had, but perceptions always change as well, guys. Next year, there may be a different career path willed for me. You don't know where you may be in 5 years' time. That's why it's good to be general and open to different career paths in your answer. First tip is ensure you name drop the behaviors that an organization is looking for. And the good thing is that the behaviors are pretty much the same across each organization, so you don't have to reinvent your answer much. Remember, an organization is investing a lot of money in you in terms of salaries and training costs, and they want to see a return on that investment. They're going to want you to stay with them for the long term and obviously progress within the organization as well. So straight away in your answer, you must talk about ambition, and specifically ambition to progress within the organization that you've applied to. Not that you qualify and go and progress somewhere else. Next, I want you to do some research on LinkedIn. You need to go and look at people's career profiles and really understand what are the different job levels at this particular organization. What does the progression path look like? Is it junior, senior, assistant manager, manager, director, partner? And you need to understand, how long do people tend to spend at each stage before they progress on to the next level? So as an example, if you qualify in practice, some firms will refer to you as a senior associate, whereas other firms may call you an assistant manager. And if you're in an interview and you talk about becoming an assistant manager and they don't even have that job level, it doesn't quite look right. Secondly, if we go back to my CFO point, if I had mentioned that in an interview, that would have been completely wrong because it's unrealistic. Again, that's why that research on LinkedIn is extremely important, so you have a good understanding of what level you can reasonably expect to be at in, say, 5 years' time or 10 years' time. Generally speaking, if you're an apprentice, it will take you around 5 years to become a chartered accountant. So if you were asked that question in an interview, you should be talking about coming to the end of your apprenticeship scheme and becoming newly qualified. Whereas for graduates, it takes around 3 years to become a chartered accountant. So in that instance, you should be talking about being 2 years post-qualified and how you're looking to get promoted to the next stage. Make sure you definitely avoid talking about moving elsewhere. It may sound obvious and you may think, Fazan, of course I'm going to avoid talking about that, but you can end up dropping subtle hints in your answer. For example, you may answer that question by saying, Fazan, I'm going to be coming towards the end of my apprenticeship scheme, and that's where I'll evaluate what opportunities are available to me. Straight away, alarm bells may be going off in my head because you may be looking at opportunities elsewhere. I know you weren't specific and you may be indicating towards progression within the firm, that those alternative opportunities exist within the firm and I'm not looking elsewhere. But you haven't made that clear in your answer. So my mind could wander and think, this person's just here for the training, they're going to leave us as soon as they qualify. You also want to make sure you talk about continuous improvement and development, how your learning will never stop. Employers will love that because if I use myself as an example, I'm always talking about technology and how you can learn different systems which will come in handy in the workplace. 5 years ago, I never knew about Power BI, I never knew about Tableau. Now, it seems that every time I have involvement with an analytics project at work, Power BI is always involved. Finally, this is one of the few questions where it's okay to kiss backside and really compliment your employer. Talk about varied opportunities that may be available to you after you qualify. Talk about learning from the best, but just be careful. You don't want to repeat points you've already made in the interview because then it just becomes obvious. So bringing everything together, if you're a graduate and you were asked that question in an interview, your answer could be along the lines of, in 5 years' time, I'd expect to be 2 years post-qualified if I've achieved first-time passes in the ACA qualification. And as one of the more experienced seniors in the team, I'd expect to be leading some of the larger, more complex projects as well as bigger teams. I'd also expect to be taking a big role in developing our future graduates and apprentices. I'd love to be able to share my own experiences from when I was a graduate, but at the same time, I wouldn't want my own learning and development to stop. I'd like that to carry on so I can remain knowledgeable on future technologies that are impacting our industry. I'm also quite ambitious, so I definitely want to progress within the firm as well, and I think after 5 years, it's reasonable to be pushing for a manager promotion. But at the same time, I'd also take take advice and guidance from our directors and partners because they'll have more experience. So they'll be able to best advise on what career paths are suitable for me. Now, my answer was brief. I spoke about 3 points. Firstly, I spoke about becoming qualified and leading teams. And if you note, I spoke specifically about leading larger teams. And the reason why was because you can lead teams in your second or third year within practice. So it's very important to make that distinction to show that you're aware that when you're post-qualified, you have more senior responsibilities. Secondly, I spoke about learning and development as well as continuous improvement. I spoke about sharing my own experiences with trainees, but I also spoke about carrying on my own learning, specifically so that I remain an asset to the organization. And thirdly, I spoke about ambition and how I want to progress specifically within the organization. I dropped the manager name grade and I also kissed backside a little bit by talking positively about directors and partners and how they can guide me into my future career path. And finally, if you noticed, when I was speaking about pushing for manager promotion, I used the phrase along the lines of I assume or I think it's reasonable to believe. And the reason why is because I'm not being definitive and it gives me a get out of jail card that if I made a mistake, the interviewer will understand. So that's why in this question, it's okay to use phrases such as I think or I believe. It just means that it gives you a get out of jail card in case you do make a mistake. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that my answer was the best, but I do think it's good enough for most interviews. Now, if I had gone into more detail and ended up making a mistake, the interviewer may pick up on that mistake. They do love to pick up on mistakes and ask you follow-up questions to see how you react. I've definitely done that in the past. So just to reiterate, keep your answer short and to the point. You don't want to be too general in your answer, but again, you don't want to go in as much detail as you would say when you're answering a competency-based question. Inshallah, I'll leave it there, guys. As always, any questions or queries, please feel free to comment below or message me on Instagram.